People pay good money to see this movie. When they go out to a theater, they want cold sodas, hot popcorn, and no monsters in the projection booth.
Everyone pretend podcasting isn't boring.
Turn it off. Turn it off.
Something inexplicable is happening where almost half the population say they remember things from the past being different or changed.
The Mandela Effect got its name because there was a very large segment of the population that believed that Nelson Mandela died decades earlier. Suddenly, his recent death was announced. Billions of people are interested in this topic, that memory isn't jiving up with reality.
It's like the Twilight Zone. Not everything is what you think it is.
In the car in which John F. Kennedy was assassinated, there were 6 passengers. I've watched the videos over and over. There is no way in my mind you could tell me there were 6 people in that car.
Things that people know so well just be twisted just enough to get people to question whether or not what they remembered was real.
There are many possibilities for the origins of the Mandela Effect. Some people think it's a simple case of mass misremembering, but the prevailing notion involves the idea that there are other universes existing right next to ours.
Fundamental reality as we know it can change. This lines up with sciences of today. CERN is a collider where they're smashing particles. Stephen Hawking, he warned people about CERN, very adamant that this was not something that we should be doing. We could be in a simulation. We don't know who is in charge. It could be aliens. It could be angels or demons, some people say. It could be just artificial intelligence.
The nightmare scenarios that could stem from that are just limitless.
Now, a growing number of people want to know if history is being edited.
You like Russia, Mom?
That's not how I remember it.
Hey folks, welcome to a special episode of The Projection Booth. I'm your host, Mike White. On this episode, I'm talking with Robert Kiviat. He is the director of the documentary, The Mandela Effect Phenomenon. You know, I had a whole discussion with Mr. Kiviat. We talked about how people misremember things, how they often misquote things. I mean, I went on for probably at least 10 minutes talking about Play It Again, Sam, and it's the name of a movie. But, you know, if you go back and you watch Casablanca, it's not there. I also told them a little bit about the history of the vehicle that JFK was riding in when he was assassinated, and that the one that is shown in his movie isn't actually the car that JFK was riding in. And you can get the whole provenance of all the changes that happened to the car if you go to the Henry Ford website and learn a little bit more about that. We even talked about things like how it doesn't make sense that when if Darth Vader were to say, "Luke, I am your father," that doesn't actually play with the previous line where Luke says, "He told me you killed him." And then he says, "No, I am your father." There's all kinds of things. We talked all about this. By the end of the discussion, he apologized for making this documentary, said that it was very dangerous to put this out there, that he just, must have misremembered some things. Even the term Mandela Effect, I explained to him that what probably happened was that people remember the film Cry Freedom, all about Stephen Biko, who was beaten to death by policemen, and that came out around the time that some people think that Nelson Mandela died. And, being kind of a racist country, we might have mixed up one black guy with another guy, especially two freedom fighters from the continent of Africa. It might happen, I don't know. But yeah, even with all of that stuff, I went to play back the tape and it's completely different than I remember. So yeah, I guess this whole Mandela effect must be real. Enjoy this interview. Well, I obviously want to talk about the new documentary, but can you tell me a little bit about you and kind of how you got your start in filmmaking?
Well, I'm pretty well known for many people in the phenomena mystery world. I had a lot of big shows on the Fox network about UFOs, the government, Bigfoot, miracles, psychic power, all the alleged claims of what I think people refer to a lot as the paranormal, but I tend to look at it as a journalist about the unexplained. And so the Fox network embraced my work when the X-Files was popular. So I ended up doing the real investigations and documentaries about the mysteries that Chris Carter and the X-Files were putting out. And then NBC Universal brought me in to kind of shore up their ship a little bit in terms of some of their programming they were doing, even at the Sci-Fi Network or Sci-Fi Channel. So they had me come in and do a series called Fact or Faked for Sci-Fi, which I developed with the executives at NBC Universal. And then I ended up doing a big special for them for NBC Universal Sci-Fi called Aliens on the Moon, The Truth Exposed, where we interviewed many experts in the moon area, including Buzz Aldrin, that on the moon, second guy on the moon, of course. And he then told our viewers, many millions of viewers, that there was indeed possibly an artificial structure in our solar system, but not on our moon, but on the moon near Mars called Phobos. And that became a big story for me back, I would say, about 6-7 years ago. And now, over the last 5-6 years, I've developed documentaries that are going to go direct to online demand or on-demand digital, because we're finding that the networks in general, broadcast where I usually do my work, are no longer even playing in the game of mystery anymore. And we can get into reasons for that. They don't want to do anything related to mystery like the Mandela Effect, which we'll get into, or anything like that, because it's just not what they want. They want things that are basically sensational and not proven in any way often. And my whole thing is to prove what's true and what's not true. So a few years ago, it became very clear to me that the next big mystery will not be UFOs, will not be other things like that. The Mandela Effect turns out to be the hottest mystery on the planet right now, no matter what anybody tells you. All you have to do is look at the billions, I mean billions, of comments on the internet, YouTube videos, TikTok videos, you name it, debate on Reddit, and we're talking about around the world. So we can talk about the Mandela Effect and how it relates to the other big mysteries that I just told you about.
Well, even before you got your start with Fox and doing those things, how did you decide you wanted to become a journalist?
It's funny. I think at the very early stages of my life, I noticed that I'm a writer. So, teachers said, you're a writer. Okay, great. But being a writer doesn't necessarily make you a journalist. And I went to college, if we're lucky enough to go to college. And one of my professors noticed that I was a pure journalist. And he motivated me to go go to a school in New York, transfer back to where I came from, New York, and literally run a newspaper at the college level. And I did a short stint in the advertising industry for a while in New York. But after a few years, I realized my calling was as a writer and as a journalist. So I got back into it and wrote some major articles in magazines. Worked for Geraldo Rivera, Now It Can Be Told, a show we had called Now It Can Be Told, a very hard-edged kind of journalism show, believe it or not, back in the early 90s. Unsolved Mysteries heard about me, and they brought me over from New York to NBC here in California, where I am now. And the rest is history. So basically, I was an early journalist. I'm talking like maybe high school, junior high. I always thought about journalism. So
why the decision to go from outer space or creatures or things coming from outer space to more of the inner space, to more of the earthbound thing as far as the Mandela Effect?
That's a great question. And whether it's an earthbound thing, we could talk about maybe some multiple earth level, I think. But overall, I tend to look at the things that catch my eye that I'm interested in. And then, of course, that is also one of the biggest pop culture mysteries people are debating, that kind of feel like it's my duty to kind of jump on that because I have kind of the acumen and the background skill level to do that. So I started looking into the Mandela Effect back around 2000. I'm going to guess it was sometime around 2016 or so. And I noticed how many people around the world were taken by this mystery. People thought certain movie scenes were different. People thought products, labels, logos, names of celebrities, all kinds of different things were changed. Biblical verses, crazy stuff. And the more I looked into it, I found what's called residual evidence. and evidence, maybe more so than any cryptid or anything like you mentioned, like a Bigfoot or anything like that. This has got much more evidence that you could bring almost into a courtroom and say, hey, there appears to be some changes in our world that we can't explain. And it's not misremembering, like some people try to say, because the evidence we're showing in our documentary is proof positive that things have changed from what they once were, according to evidence that we show in our program, in our movie.
You primarily rely on two narrators / subjects for your documentary. I'm curious where you found these guys.
It's a very important point you're bringing up, and I appreciate it. We have two of the most prolific experts on Mandela Effect that have put out in different ways a real expertise and an acumen to look into this mystery. The first one was Jacob Israel, a YouTuber, basically, who noticed right away, and a writer. He's a writer, extensive background as a writer in television and in books. He decided to apply all that skill and knowledge to the Mandela Effect before almost anyone else had really done a real deep dive into it back in 2016 or so, 2017 period. And that's when I kind of came across the mystery and really started to build my own research. And my research sort of merged right into his research. The other person is a guy named Mark Lafreme. Mark is a tried and true hard-edge journalist, news journalist, works for a main newspaper. He is absolutely the real deal when it comes to showing up at murder scenes, working with the police, doing local news that affects the local area and the national implications, a major journalist. And then when I found out that he had his own Mandela Effect and wrote about it extensively in his own newspaper, I had to have him. He tells the story as a journalist, not only about the Mandela Effect, because he dug so deeply into it as a journalist like me, like a mirror image of me as a journalist in a way, but he had his own personal Mandela Effect. I have mine, but he had his, which is so interesting. And I'll tell you about it if you want to hear it. And I want people to watch the movie, of course, but we'll tell a little of this if you want. Mark remembers distinctly. And don't forget, here's a reporter that could write articles based on memory almost. Like this guy is that talented, a writer and a journalist and a major column in the newspaper, a column. So he said, and has told people, like in my movie, that one day he's at his mom's house and there was a picture in the home of him and his brother with his father. And lo and behold, one day he looks at that photograph and in the picture, his brother and him are basically switching places in the photograph. Where one time he was on one side of his father, his brother was on the other side. He came into his house one day and they had switched places as if it was a different photograph, as if a photograph had been taken differently at some time, some timeline, some other dimension, I don't know. And it freaked him out to the point where he did not want to go to the house often. And every time he went to the house and saw the picture, he got the chills. He didn't know anything about the Mandela Effect at that point, as I understand it. So that was the beginning of his own knowledge of something shifting. And then when he saw the Mandela Effect come into the cultural, onto the cultural landscape, and he found out he was one of millions, if not billions of people that are having very similar experiences.
You mentioned your own personal one. Could you share that as well?
So years ago, I had a very good friend named Jeff, and Jeff and I used to go to Roosevelt Field Mall quite a bit. This is a mall in New York on Long Island, where I come from. And it's a very prominent mall. Kids go there. We take the bus usually and come back to the bus. We're not driving at that point when you're 13, 14 years old. So we used to go to Roosevelt Field a lot. And I distinctly, more than anything I could tell you, remember J.C. Penney, the department store, was literally right by the bus stop. And there's no way we wouldn't have been talking intelligently, because we like to talk about some cool stuff. We would have been talking right away about the weird spelling of J.C. Penney. J.C. Penney is spelled like J.C. Penney, like it's some kind of a French name. I don't know. When we were going to Roosevelt Field and J.C. Penney was right there, it was J.C. and like Penny, Penny, like a penny. Okay. Whatever this new name is, J.C. Penney, it doesn't come from my timeline. It doesn't come from a timeline I lived on. Now, it does appear that there was a J.C. Penney, like I'm saying, often in newspapers. And that's just some of the residual evidence that we may not have included all that in our movie this time because there's so much we wanted to get in. But for me, the J.C. Penney name, there's residual evidence. If you look back at all these old newspapers for years and years, you'll find many ads for J.C. Penney with just the Y, no EY. So that's the kind of residual evidence we're talking about. Newspapers are not going to make a mistake in droves with a name like that. Just like we have in our movie what's called the Berenstain Bears. The Berenstain Bears. Right now, the books that kids loved is called Berenstain, A-I-N, Berenstain. Now look, I don't know what name Berenstain is, but most people remember Berenstain Bears. Now, when you go to TV Guide, which we did, we found TV Guide spelling it Berenstain, the way many people by the millions remember Berenstain Bears being written or being written out. So we have a huge problem when it comes to things like J.C. Penney, like I mentioned, for me and many other people. We have Berenstain Bears instead of Berenstain Bears. That's what people remember. And TV Guide, the one book that clearly everybody was almost worshiping when TV Guide was the main book for TV. They're not going to make a mistake with a name like that. You're not going to spell the name of a show wrong. It would be almost egregious at that point. So we are pointing to this kind of evidence and many, many more things in our movie that show that at one time, for whatever reason, there's evidence that things were one way and they're not now.
I was curious how you decided to structure the documentary. What did you think? Did you make a list of these are all the things and these are the most important things? Like, what's your actual process for this?
The structure of this documentary is planned basically because we realized we're like courtroom prosecutors. We're presenting a case to the public. We want to get those two main people on the stand, make it clear to people what they claim, and show the evidence that what they are presenting. Again, we are more like the prosecutors, and we figured if we start bringing in a lot of people, a lot of talking heads with varying opinions, that's not going to get anywhere in an hour and a half, 2 hour movie. That's not going to get anywhere. So we looked at it like this is our courtroom presentation. Call it your opening and closing remarks. This is something we have to make our point very clear in under 2 hours that something has changed in our culture. And we felt these two witnesses, if you will, these two, star witnesses would be the best way to do it than any other way.
What's interesting, you're talking about the witness for the prosecution. Did you think about bringing in a witness for the defense as well?
I think everybody out there will find out that my fellow brethren journalists, like Mark mentions in our show as a journalist, he sort of represents my point of view as well. Most journalists have missed this one so badly, it's laughable. There are journalists out there that have written about this being misremembering. They bring in some psychologist who brings in some other kind of cockamamie, analyst, Look, I'm telling you right now, when you look at the evidence we show, no psychologist, no brain expert, no memory expert. That's what most journalists are calling this, some sort of misremembering phenomena. There are millions and millions of people who remember things being one way and then evidence supporting what those millions of people remember, if not billions of people. So basically, we're making this point in our movie that there's no doubt some kind of metaphysical, physical, quantum physical, something has happened that cannot be explained, and it is not misremembering. We will leave that to the public when they're done with our movie, and we sure hope you watch it, and then you can go do all your research and find out what all the skeptics think. And by the way, of all the mysteries I've looked into, the skeptical debunkers out there have the hardest time with this, maybe more than any other mystery I've noticed.
I know you spend a lot of time kind of post-2008. You really concentrate on CERN and the Large Hadron Collider. Did you think about going back a little bit further? I mean, there were so many cases like McMartin daycare, the Kern County cases, all those things in the early 80s where there were so many false memories. And I was curious if you thought about including more of that. That's
fascinating. You bring up the McMartin case and the allegations that kids were fed psychological, as I think historically in the timeline I live on, I don't know. I don't want to be 100% sure here, but I like to be up on these kind of stories. So I think what you're saying is in the McMartin case, when children were interviewed by psychotherapists, therapists, all kinds of different, therapists of the, cerebral kind, they eventually determined that these probably were memories somewhat planted, somewhat manipulated out of the therapy they were doing, and it wasn't exactly what they thought initially. That's not the kind of misremembering we're talking about here. We're talking about the kind of thing that everyday people are just going about their life, and they put on an old movie they saw, and oh my God, what? That scene was never like that. And then you go and you research it, like Darth Vader, Luke, I am your father, in a movie. The character's James Earl Jones. James Earl Jones obviously remembers this maybe most iconic scene in any movie he was ever in, although he was in a costume. And he tells in our movie, and anyone else who will listen, it was Luke, I am your father. That was the line Darth Vader said to Luke in the movie. What you see now is, no, I am your father, which doesn't even seemingly make sense because the way these scenes put together, it almost requires him to go, Luke, I am your father. So then we show the evidence in our movie that in a scene from the comedy 2.5 Men years later, when they're doing a comedic sketch and they invite James Earl Jones to play himself and give a voicemail to one of the characters that in the voice of James Earl Jones, he's walking by the camera and he goes, so what do you want? Luke, I am your father, or this is CNN? These are two of his most iconic lines he's ever said, one for CNN, the broadcast, the CNN network, and one for the movie Empire Strikes Back. Do you think he's going to make that mistake? He even went and showed his script in our movie, you'll see. And the script says, Luke, I am your father. So what happened? There's no doubt when you go to Lucasfilms and you ask Lucasfilms about this figurine they created, which is from trademark with Lucasfilms. Little Darth Vader, when you press the button, it goes, Luke, I am your father. So it's like, what's going on? How could the film company make a mistake like that? They would not. So at one time, our premise is this, our prosecution of the case is, at one time, for instance, the movie Empire Strikes Back had him saying, Luke, I am your father. How it changed, why that movie, that's for another movie, maybe. But we try to touch on it just a little bit in our documentary about why.
Can you explain the term Mandela effect overall? Just because I know it gets bandied about, but how does Nelson Mandela play into the effect?
Oh, it's a great question. Great question again. Mandela effect originates its name from about 2013, 2014. It's a little bit vague what year this exactly was, but why don't we say 2013, 2014? A researcher noticed that a lot of people thought Nelson Mandela, actually, it might have been a little before 2013. I was trying to get my years straight there. While he was still alive, as we know it, alive, Nelson Mandela, many people thought he had died already. And that when he eventually died, I think it was 13, everybody thought he was already dead. Wait a minute. A lot of people thought he was already dead. And they thought he was dead, not only by their own memory, they also recalled watching actual funeral processions and his wife crying. And this would mean that he never left jail. He never left prison. He died in prison, never became the head of South Africa, never became the main leader against apartheid, helping the world so much that way. I mean, to think that people thought he never came out and did that and never became the leader of South Africa, I mean, that freaked out a lot of people. So they started to do research. And so that's when all these other Mandela effects started to be, noticed. So the name was coined on Nelson Mandela's Mandela effect. People were feeling he was alive or was dead when he was alive. And then when he finally became dead, people started to really freak out. That's how it all kind of went together.
So you're saying there's probably a version of the universe where Nelson Mandela did die in prison versus the one where he died elsewhere.
Exactly. It's so interesting you say it just like that, because There's a show that just completed its series run on I don't want to give a plug really for no reason, but it's a good show for people to watch. I think it's a little bit confusing. It's a show called Dark Matter on Apple TV. And basically it's the same premise that in another universe, another timeline right next to ours, there could be me sitting in this chair, but I'm talking a little bit differently about the show. I'm giving you a little bit different opinion about the show, but it's very similar. In this case, there's a universe where Nelson Mandela did not die. I mean, died actually the way that, people in the Mandela effect affected people say. He stayed in prison, died in prison, never came out. Who knows what happened on that planet or that world where Nelson Mandela didn't lead apartheid in South Africa, and who knows against apartheid, and then who knows what South Africa became in the other universe. But that's the way we're looking at it. So that other show I was mentioning really plays on this issue quite a bit. It's very ubiquitous in the culture now. Things like other dimensions, merging timelines, portals, like people say CERN may have opened a portal to another dimension, and that may have led some of this Mandela effect artifacts to kind of come in to our present reality. We have a person in our show who describes that quite well, Gordy Rose, who helped invent and market the quantum computer. And he said back in 2000, we'll say 2015 roughly, he said, we believe with these techniques of quantum physics tests, CERN, building the quantum computer, that we can take a piece of one dimension in the near future and pull it into our dimension. So a piece of information could be brought from another dimension right into this dimension. Fascinating. He predicted that right before the Mandela effect became a big thing. Pretty amazing.
Do we live in a world where terms like alternative facts are used? Do you think it's a little dangerous to even talk about this in a world where things are so not certain, and we have people that can look at the same situation and get, it's not even a Rashomon effect, it's just completely, I saw this happen and I saw that happen? Is this a dangerous phenomenon?
There's no doubt this is a very dangerous phenomenon, and that's one reason I did the movie. One of our people in the movie, Mark Lefebvre, says literally, it's a kind of thing that may get much more intense. That's my word. It may just proliferate even more and more to the point where you come home one day and your wife's not named Jane, it's Betty. You don't have 2 kids, now you got 3 kids, or you lost a kid. I mean, it's a different life. Fascinating the things that people are already noticing. There are relationships around the world right now where people think that's not my wife. That's not my husband. That seems like my husband. That looks like my husband. In this world, he's my husband, but he's not the same. And there are many people that are saying that now. Does that mean that it opened up the door to different people's opinion of facts, being very selective of what their facts are, putting aside like credentials, like being qualified to be president of the United States? You can go, you know where I'm going with that. So I don't know necessarily if people think it's weird that Donald Trump became president, but I'm telling you right now, as someone who grew up in New York, watched that guy implode in so many ways, blow away New Jersey's Atlantic City, hurt lots of people, a lot of people hurt financially. Guy had very little ethics, literally cheated on one woman, I mean, the bottom line is, how does a guy like that become president? How does that even happen? I don't care if you're Republican. I don't care if you're Democrat. Explain to me how someone with that background became president of the United States and may become president again in a few months. How's that possible? I don't make that comment in the movie, but I say it to you. It doesn't make any sense to me. So those are the kind of things that I think have to be looked at under the Mandela Effect banner, if you will, or an umbrella. I do believe that.
The movie comes out July 9th. Where is it going to be available, and how can people see it and keep up with the movie?
It's going to be available on-demand digital everywhere, probably any platform you presently get your movies and click on. You can rent it or buy it on July 9th. So July 9th, all you got to do is put up the name, The Mandela Effect Phenomenon, in your phone, on your browser, and it'll show you what places you can go buy it on your convenient, Apple TV, iTunes, whatever the platform you like to get your stuff from.
Do you already have your next project in mind?
Yeah, I do actually. I think we've noticed that there's a lot of strange music right now. music coming out of the hip hop area, especially hip hop. People, even Taylor Swift, Doja Cat, they appear to be using demonic symbolism in their music to a frightening degree. And we are now looking into why people like Jay-Z and Beyonce are proudly, even LeBron James, sports figure, are doing Illuminati-like symbols, putting their eye like this. We believe Stanley Kubrick, who's one of my great idols in film and anywhere, arts, if you will. Stanley Kubrick did a movie years ago called Eyes Wide Shut. We're going to call our movie, likely, Kubrick's Eyes Wide Open. Stanley literally planted a seed in me, believe it or not, whether he knows it or not, that I was studying this issue about why are we seeing Illuminati, Luciferian, Freemasony type symbols in music so much, and also could it lead to some kind of a world controlling cabal? And strangely enough, in the movie Eyes Wide Open, he has Tom Cruise, the character in the movie, going back to the location where some of the strange, kind of strange activities been going on with rich people having strange, bizarre, I would call them, kind of like rituals. As he's driving, he's going to my exit on the Long Island Expressway, exit 39 on the Long Island Expressway, of all places. Why a guy from London, Stanley Kubrick, picked my exit for him to be going to. Now, if he's going to the exit of the Long Island Expressway, anybody in New York should be buying my movie, because you got to understand, when that show comes out, we're going to be looking at where in New York and Long Island would there be a eyes wide kind of open scene like that? And people don't remember what that was like. And it ties into the Mandela Effect, because we were saying in the Mandela Effect at the end of our movie, the Mandela Effect Phenomenon, that we're seeing more demonic energy and symbolism and things, such as in our movie, we talk about Travis Scott and that tragic incident that happened where people died, and he was literally having people walk into a demonic face. That's what they walked into. If you see the way the concert was put together, you're walking into like a demonic image to go into the actual concert. Lo and behold, I think close to 10 people were trampled, died, suffocated. That's terrible. How about this? Why would Kate Middleton show up with her baby a few years ago wearing the same exact dress Mia Farrow wore in Rosemary's Baby? Why would she be wearing the exact same dress? You figure even our guy in our movie, our star of the Mandela Effect Phenomenon, Jacob Israel, says that exactly. Don't you think somebody would have warned Kate, hey, maybe you don't want to be wearing the same dress that was worn by Mia Farrow in Rosemary's Baby? It's a demonic movie. You may not want to be wearing that. So what is she suggesting? That the baby is somehow the Antichrist? What is going on here? You mean to tell me no one knew that famous dress? We show that dress back to back in our movie, and you go, what? So the Mandela Effect is a great jumping off point to the issue about this area of music right now that is so obvious. Let me make sure you know even more what the next movie is going to show, probably. Doja Cat very beautifully came in the scene. She's a very well-known, rapper and singer right now. She had a song a few years ago called Say So. She plays a very nice scene of a girl just getting ready to listen to her albums years ago. It's like a throwback to the 70s. Nice, disco-like feeling. All nice, all great. She raps a little bit in there, says one or two words, maybe a little risque. That's it. You look at her now. She just had recently a 27-year-old birthday party. She invited all celebrities, and guess what it was? An eyes wide open themed party. Everybody wore the outfits from Eyes Wide Open. That's pretty freaky. And so we're wondering, what is the symbolism of that? We'll be talking a lot about that in the next movie.
Mr. Kiviat, thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate this.
My pleasure. Thanks for your questions. They were great. I really appreciate that a lot.
We met at 9.
We met at 8.
I was on time.
No, you were late.
Ah, yes? I remember it well. We dined with friends.
We dined alone.
A tenor sang.
A baritone.
Ah, yes. I remember it well. dazzling April moon.
There was none that night, and the month was June.
That's right. That's right.
It warms my heart to know that you remember still the way you do.
Ah, yes. I remember it well. How often I've thought of that Friday
Mandela.
night when we had our last rendezvous. And somehow I foolishly wondered if you might, by some chance, be thinking of it too. That carriage ride,
You walked me home.
you lost a glove.
I lost a comb.
Ah, yes, I remember it well. That brilliant sky,
We had some rain
those Russian songs.
from sunny Spain.
Ah, yes, I remember it well. You wore a gown of gold.
I was all in blue.
Am I getting old?
Oh no, not you. How strong you were, how young and gay, a prince of love in every way.
Oh, yes. I remember it well.
It has happened. I watched it happen. I saw it happen. Don't tell me it didn't happen.